Welcome to Volume 4 of Lord of the Mystery is the Undying. Klein, a Sequence 5, needs to obtain the Sequence 4 Magician Formula. To do so, he needs to get his hands on the Antigonus family notebook from the Church of the Evernight Goddess. Therefore, he disguises himself as Dwayne Dantis, a wealthy merchant who believes in the Evernight Goddess, and returns to Backlund, intending to steal the notebook. After careful consideration, he formulates a detailed plan, frequently go to the church to pray, sincerely donate money, and gradually become familiar with the bishop. During this process, he will strive to find the guardian who watches over the sealed artifact, and when the time is right, impersonate him to take away the notebook. Before this, however, he met an old friend, Miss Sharon, who was as exquisite as a doll. She told Klein that the Baron's residence had been destroyed. So, the two of them explored together and discovered that the Red Angel evil spirit in the underground ruins had escaped. The Red Angel is a Sequence 1 Angel King, one of the 8 Angel Kings serving the ancient Sun God. Now, the situation of this evil spirit is quite complex. It is based on the Red Angel, and also fused with the REM spirits of 2 other Sequence 1 angels, meaning 3 angels share one body. However, Klein and Miss Sharon have not found too many clues yet, and have to return. Afterwards, Klein, disguised as a wealthy merchant, went to the Servants' Association, preparing to hire an experienced butler. Through divination, he chose a butler named Walter, because he might be related to the Backlund Great Smog event, and Klein is still investigating the truth behind the event. Later, the Tarot gathering was held as scheduled. At the meeting, the hermit handed over Emperor Rozel's diary, given by the mysterious queen, Bernadette, to the fool. In exchange, she wanted to know who else is mentioned in this diary besides Rozel. The fool calmly said, "The diary mentioned Mr. Dorr, and Mr. Dorr is the ancestor of the Abraham family." Later, Klein was invited to a dance and met a noble young lady named Hazel. She became a Beyonder due to certain events, and therefore has a strong sense of superiority over ordinary people. One midnight, Klein suddenly woke up, got out of bed, and walked to the window. He noticed the butler coming to a sewer entrance, removing the manhole cover and climbing down. So, Klein manipulated his marionette, Blood Admiral, to follow behind him. To his surprise, the person the butler was secretly meeting was actually his acquaintance, the witch Trissy Chick. Even more surprising to him was that Trissy was thinking of avenging the dead prince. He clearly remembered that before the Backlund Great Smog event, Trissy couldn't wait to get rid of the prince's control and escape the manipulation of the mastermind behind her fate. Now, to avenge the prince, she had sold her soul to the evil god, the primordial witch. After the butler left, he had his marionette appear and talk to her, because Klein wanted to uncover the truth about the Great Smog event. So, the two reached a cooperation. On the other side, Force, a member of the Tarot Club, learned from her teacher that a man named Louis, who had once received favor from the Abraham family, betrayed them for personal gain, causing severe damage to the Abraham family. Therefore, Force posted a bounty in the Tarot Club, offering a reward for this Sequence 5 traveler. Klein, using his identity as German Sparrow, accepted this task. He disguised himself as a member and participated in a gathering. Silently and without a sound, he completely controlled Louis. Then he drew his mourner's gun, aimed it at him, and pulled the trigger. One shot, fatal. The mourner rang for him. Not long after, Klein cooperated with the hanged man Alger, and together they explored a mysterious primitive island. They hadn't gone far when they encountered Beyonder creatures, the psychedelic wind chime trees. The ocean songster Alger turned his head and said to Klein in a deep voice, "You'd better block your ears and restrain your spirituality." Alger opened his mouth and sang hoarsely. His singing was rough and unrestrained, completely contrary to normal human perception, full of a power that made people irritable, nauseous, and head itchy. Klein endured the feeling of his mind being torn apart. After Alger dealt with the wind chime trees, he turned to look at Klein, only to see Klein's stern face slightly distorted, the whites of his eyes faintly red, seeming like he might erupt and attack him at any moment. Alger's nerves tightened instantly, and he said guiltily, "Let's continue forward." Klein nodded coldly and walked towards the depths of the island. Alger followed closely behind. The two continued to move forward, finally arriving at their destination, the church on the island. When they reached the end, they saw a painting. The painting was dark in tone. The main subject was a long table, and lying on the table was a figure carrying a cross. 3 figures shrouded in shadows surrounded it. One person tore off the central figure's arm and stuffed it into their mouth, chewing with a mouthful of blood. Another person held up the head, sucking the brain matter. And another dug out the still beating heart, hungrily gnawing on it. Klein's head swelled and he felt dizzy, filled with extreme horror, because the figure being dismembered and devoured represented the ancient sun god, represented the Lord who created everything, and the omniscient and omnipotent God worshipped by Silver City. And the 3 figures surrounding him respectively represented the 3 Orthodox gods, Evernight Goddess, Lord of Storms, and God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Klein and Alger were dumbfounded. because if the content of the painting was true, it meant that the three orthodox gods were all angel kings under the ancient sun god, and they had betrayed him. At this moment, sharp, piercing sounds suddenly emanated from the three stone coffins in front. Then, the coffin lids were pushed open, and three distorted figures stood up. Klein and Alger engaged in a fierce battle with them, escaped the island, and obtained a blasphemy card Tarrant. There were also other spoils, such as some Sequence 5 Beyonder characteristics. At the next Tarot gathering, Mr. World consecutively took out several Sequence 5 Beyonder characteristics, asking if anyone wanted to buy them. Hearing this, the other members of the Tarot Club were horrified. Magician Force had already imagined a series of stories in her mind. Son Derek became even more worshipful of Mr. World. Justice Audrey and Moon Emlyn were speechless for a long time. After the sale, the hanged man shared a mural with everyone at the Tarot Club. The mural he and Klein had seen on the island. The mural of angel kings devouring the ancient sun god. All the members were shocked. Son Derek's mind was filled with pain and despair. Silver City, where he lived, worshipped the ancient sun god. Various scriptures emphasized, the sun god only abandoned this land for some reason, making it a god-forsaken land. Therefore, as long as they sincerely repented and prayed for forgiveness, one day God would truly return and let the sun shine on the whole world again. But now Derek knew that no matter what, Silver City would not be redeemed, because God was dead and would never return. This meant that the hope Silver City had been waiting and searching for was just an illusion that could never be realized. Even long after the Tarot gathering ended, Derek was still in a daze, and uncontrollable despair and pain rolled in his chest, deepening moment by moment. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the streets. He stood in the darkness of the room, staring blankly outside, not moving for a long time, but his hands unknowingly clenched tightly. He murmured, "Give off light and heat as much as you can. If there is no bonfire, then I will be the only light." Son Derek decided to become the sun and dispel the darkness for Silver City. On Klein's side, he had made various preparations to steal the notebook. Under the disguise of the Faceless, he smoothly passed through the Chanis Gate and walked towards the deeper underground. Various sealed artifacts were stored there, but just as he touched the Antigonus family notebook, a woman appeared at the entrance. She wore a hood and a classic robe. Her face was beautiful but expressionless. Her black eyes were deep but lacked spirituality. The next moment, Klein's body was like being erased by an eraser, and soon completely disappeared. When he woke up, he found himself surrounded by mist, and there was a small town not far away. This was a strange place, isolated from the outside world, unable to use Azik's copper whistle, and even unable to enter the gray fog space. At this moment, he heard slight footsteps. The newcomer was a woman with extremely bright and beautiful features, who smiled and began to talk with Klein. She told Klein that this place was in some kind of hidden state, and the clue to leave was in a dangerous church. There were quite a few people who had entered here for various reasons, but now basically none were left, because the only food here was their own kind. The woman raised her finger and pointed to the scarlet moon in the mist in mid-air, saying that when the red moon became clear, it would be very dangerous here. Speaking of this, she turned to point at herself, saying that she had been seriously injured because of this. Hearing this, Klein subconsciously cast his gaze over. At this moment, her fair skin changed, highlighting dense and numerous mysterious patterns, and deep, dark, and evil colors. Klein's thoughts exploded with a bang, and depression and screams echoed in his mind. His body weakened rapidly, and he involuntarily fell to the ground. The woman walked towards him step by step, her eyes stained with an indescribable blood color, like a stray dog that had been hungry for several days, seeing a steak grilled until it sizzled with oil. The woman was a Sequence 4 Demigod, Despair Witch. Sequence 4 and above all have mythical creature forms, and creatures without divinity will suffer severe damage just by seeing them, like Klein now. Klein reacted immediately and used a paper figurine substitute. Klein's figure appeared not far away, and then began to run quickly, but the gap between Sequence 4 and Sequence 5 was huge. Soon he was severely injured again. At this critical moment, the scarlet moonlight suddenly brightened. The Despair Witch showed a horrified expression, no longer caring about him, and rushed into the house next to her, slamming the door shut. Klein temporarily escaped death, and also rushed into a nearby house, because he remembered that when the red moon became clear, it would be very dangerous here. As soon as he entered the house, the surrounding shadows suddenly contracted inward, drilling into his nostrils, mouth, and ears. The one who attacked was Mr. A from the Aurora Order, a Sequence 5 shepherd, the protagonist who was stopped by Klein in the Backland Smog event during the True Creator's Advent ritual. His eyes were blood red, looking at Klein as if he saw a sumptuous meal. That hunger from the bottom of his heart, from his instinct, was not concealed at all. The strong hunger had completely made Mr. lose his sanity, no longer caring about the red moon in the sky. In a critical moment, Klein thought that he had food on him. Klein hurriedly threw out the mushroom. Mr. A unhesitatingly stuffed it into his mouth, chewed and swallowed it, regaining his sanity. He looked at the red moon in the sky, and step by step retreated to the corner, merging into the shadows. Afterwards, poor Klein was chased by that despair witch again. Helplessly, he entered the dangerous church that the despair witch had mentioned. Here, he found an old man in a black robe. He wore a hood, and the white beard on his mouth and face was long and dense. The old man saw Klein, smiled, and said he could tell him how to escape from here. This old man was the missing leader of the Hermit Order, the owner of the Seer Pathway potion that Klein had been searching for, the angel of the Seer Pathway, Zangwill. But at this time, Zangwill was just a historical projection. With his help, Klein escaped and also schemed to kill the Despair Witch and Mr. A of the Aurora Order. Through this experience, he also learned the name of Sequence 0 of the Seer Pathway, which was the Fool. At this moment, a strong sense of destiny surged in his heart, feeling that everything had been arranged from the beginning. In addition, he also obtained the Sequence 4 Magician Potion formula. The ritual for taking the potion is as follows. Mainly relying on one's own strength and planning, in the presence of many spectators, direct a grand drama to assassinate a demigod, and then take the potion at the end of the drama. After this incident, Klein often dreamed of the Misty Town, dreamed of the Despair Witch, and dreamed of Zangwill. He knew that there was a problem with his spirit. Fortunately, Miss Justice of the Tarot Club was a Sequence 7 psychiatrist. Klein, as the world, asked Justice to do psychological counseling for him. Under Miss Justice's gentle and patient comfort, Klein's mental state was completely restored. In the Church of the Evernight Goddess, Klein's former colleague Leonard, after some reasoning, believed that Detective Sherlock, Adventurer German, and Wealthy Dawn were likely members of the Tarot Club. He suddenly realized that the time Sherlock left Backland coincided with the time German appeared at sea. He took a breath, thinking that these two were very likely the same person. Thinking of this, he took out Sherlock's portrait and carefully looked at it. As he looked, Leonard's gaze gradually solidified, and his brow furrowed uncontrollably, because Sherlock looked very much like someone, his former deceased colleague Klein. Leonard's expression suddenly froze, his hands clenched tightly, and every joint turned white. Several days later, he returned to Tingen City, stood in front of Klein's grave, and quietly watched the tombstone. At this time, the sun was bright in the sky, while a corner of the cemetery was quiet and shady. Leonard suddenly picked up the iron shovel inserted beside him. As two piles of soil gradually rose, the tomb was gradually exposed. Finally, Leonard bent down and reached out his hands to grasp the edge of the coffin lid. He suddenly exerted force and lifted the heavy tomb lid, discovering that the dark coffin was empty. He maintained his half-bowed body, quietly watching this scene, like a stone statue. Klein, Sherlock, and German are one person. This thought surged in his heart. At the same time, Klein knew through dream divination that Leonard had already learned part of his identity. However, he had specially handled Dawn Danis's wealthy identity, so Leonard did not discover it, and instead believed that Dawn and he were both members of the Tarot Club. A few days later, Leonard entered Dawn Danis's dream to discuss with him. Under Dawn's superbretoric guidance, Leonard believed that Dawn and Klein were two different people, both members of the secret organization that believed in the Fool, and their purpose was revenge. After Klein confused him, he said again, "We are all for revenge. If you also have similar purposes or need help, you can also chant the honorific name of the Fool, and perhaps you will receive a response." Leonard thought that Dawn was habitually preaching, and did not think too much about it, responding with silence. After obtaining enough information, Leonard did not dare to stay any longer, bowed to Dawn, and then left his dream. Soon, Klein, playing the role of Wealthy Dawn, had a business dispute with a certain baron and was threatened. After the baron left, the butler suggested that Dawn temporarily hire a few bodyguards. Klein nodded and agreed to his suggestion. Coincidentally, the two temporary bodyguards were Tarot Club members, Magician Fours and her friend Shio. During their days as bodyguards, they witnessed the infighting of high society and other bizarre things. Magician Fours couldn't help but sigh, "Miss her. Dawn is such a poor fellow. The butler is studying black magic. The personal valet secretly believes in death. There are people with supernatural powers hidden in the neighborhood, and there are secrets in the district where he lives. I hope he doesn't lose his life because of this. After all, he is just a helpless ordinary person." Soon Dawn established a scholarship fund for civilians and donated more than £10,000, which was a huge sum. Even in high society, there were only a few people who could afford to donate so much money. For this reason, the Church of the Evernight Goddess specially held a charity dinner, inviting major nobles to participate. Although the guests were all dressed extraordinarily, they still couldn't conceal the brilliance of a blonde girl. She had bright features and an outstanding temperament, and her emerald green eyes were as beautiful as gemstones. She was Miss Justice of the Tarot Club, Countess Audrey, the daughter of Earl Hall. Klein hurriedly shifted his gaze, not daring to look too much, because Miss Justice was a spectator pathway beyond her. If he attracted her attention, it would be easy for her to interpret his true thoughts and hidden secrets. But Audrey had already advanced to Sequence 6 Hypnotist, and still noticed Dawn dances abnormality. At the next tarot gathering, Miss Justice entrusted the members of the club to investigate Dawn's identity, with a reward of £500. Hearing the task, Magician Fours was very excited and almost raised her hand to answer immediately. After all, she had been Dawn's bodyguard and had a considerable understanding of him. But just as she was about to speak, Mr. World Jarman raised his hand. At the same time, the Hanged Man, the Hermit, and other members also turned their attention to the world, because the Fool's devotee actively accepting the investigation mission made people feel that there were important secrets hidden inside. The world raising his hand at this moment was a decision made by Klein after repeated consideration, because if he chose to hide at this time, there would still be a risk of exposure later. Moreover, Dawn was about to delve into Backlund's high society, and it was very likely that he would need Miss Justice to provide side help. At that time, this spectator would likely be able to detect something. So, being frank was a more effective way to deal with it than lying. So, the world looked at Justice and slowly said, Dawn is an identity shared by me and my companions. I occasionally disguise myself as him. Soon, Klein learned that someone was inquiring about the organization that believed in the Fool, and was slightly surprised. When he saw the appearance of the inquirer clearly, the suppressed emotions all turned into shock, and a storm surged in his heart in an instant. The inquirer was a young man with slightly curly black hair, a wider forehead, thin cheeks, deep black eyes, and wearing a monocle. He was Emin, the blasphemer Emin. Facing such a powerful opponent, Klein first informed the old angel residing in Leonard of Emin's arrival in Backlund. The next day, Leonard got up full of energy, just preparing to go to work, when he suddenly found a thin letter in the mailbox. He tore open the seal, and most of the letter was blank, with only a short sentence. Emin has arrived. Leonard's pupils suddenly dilated, and the old angel in his body was also facing a formidable enemy. Immediately afterwards, the old angel introduced Emin's terror to Leonard. He has countless avatars. These avatars may be passers-by or birds on the roof, or even ants on the ground. Unless one is a demigod, even if his avatar invades one's body, there will be no awareness at all. Ubiquitous avatars are certainly terrifying, but what is even more terrifying is that Ammon can steal fate. The so-called stealing fate means that Ammon will follow you home, and then your parents will regard him as their son. Your wife will regard him as her husband. Your children will regard him as their father. Your friends, everyone you know will think he is you, and you will become a fateless one, losing connection with everything in the real world, and dying little by little. This kind of theft is permanently effective. This ability is simply unimaginable. Leonard decisively left Backlund under the pretext of a mission. Klein began to seriously consider how he could use arms dealing as an excuse to get away from Backlund for a while as soon as possible. In Silver City, the city of Silver, Chief Colin turned to Derek and asked about the ritual he had performed when he was possessed by Ammon, the ritual of praying to the Fool. Little Son was a little at a loss, and could only find an excuse to return to his room to beg the Fool for guidance. Under the Fool's instructions, he told the ritual to the Chief. After watching Son leave, the Chief took out 3 candles and silently arranged the ritual, praying to an unknown existence. It was no different from dancing on the edge of a knife, but the despair that the Creator could not return, the abnormality of Lovia and Derek, the prophecy of the doomsday disaster, all of these forced this veteran demigod to consider making a deal with a hidden existence. He silently breathed a sigh of relief and chanted the Fool's honorific name. As soon as his voice fell, indescribable divinity diffused from the candlelight, making everything more illusory, presenting boundless gray-white fog in an ancient palace. Colin stared intently at this scene, and all kinds of thoughts surged into his mind. This was the projection of the spirit world. Before the Creator abandoned this land, the spirit world was easily observable. Now it only exists in various records, and no one can touch the spirit world anymore. It has been 2583 years, a full 2583 years. Silver City finally received a normal response again. At this moment, the white-haired demon hunter Colin suddenly closed his eyes, and one figure after another flashed through his mind inexplicably. They were his father and mother whose lives were ended by his own hands. Now that Silver City has received a response again, in his heart, this is the true future of Silver City, the true hope. Colin began to pray to turn the time worm left by Emin into a charm. Klein responded to Chief Colin's prayer and bestowed the charm upon Colin, bringing Dawn to Silver City. Soon he left Backlund. During his journey through the Berserk Sea, he noticed that Azik's copper whistle was vibrating slightly. The copper whistle had lost its usual coldness and gentleness, becoming somewhat hot. He hurriedly wrote a letter to inform Mr. Azik of this matter. The vibration of the copper whistle might be related to death. Azik soon traveled through the spirit world and arrived. The information the two of them had at this time was not enough, so they traveled to the pirate ship of the Hellsinger, the pirate ship of the pirate admiral with the highest bounty and strongest strength among the 7 pirate admirals, with whom Klein had fought before. But to Klein's shock, when the two of them appeared, the Hellsinger bent down and knelt down to Mr. Azik, kissing the deck like the most loyal and humble servant. The entire ship was silent. Azik raised his hand and pressed the silk top hat on his head, walking unhurriedly towards the Hellsinger kneeling on the ground. When he stopped in front of him, the Hellsinger took off the blackthorn ring on his right hand and held it forward with both hands. Azik examined it for a few seconds, picked up the ring left by death, put it on the index finger of his left hand. Suddenly, a terrifying and deep aura spread out from him. The living corpses and skeletons on the ship knelt down on one knee, buried their heads low, daring only to look at his leather boots. The flying wraith shadows also fell to the ground, tightly affixed to the deck, and no longer floated in mid-air. Klein looked at Azik's back, opened his mouth but said nothing. Azik walked forward 2 steps, walked to the side of the Hellsinger, and said, "You will be Klein's marionette for a year." These words were plain and unremarkable, as if it was just a trivial matter. The Hellsinger's body trembled violently, seeming angry and unwilling, but in the end he still did not raise his head, still pressing his forehead tightly against the deck. Ince Wes, Great Death Council. In this way, Klein gained a new marionette. Afterwards the two came to the Berserk Sea, the land where death fell. Here Azik saw a huge feathered serpent. Pale flames burned in its eyes, and its face was a human face, exactly the same as Mr. Azik's. Azik suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head and recalled everything, understanding the reason why he kept dying and resurrecting, always losing his memory, and finding it back time and time again. His soul was not complete. And that feathered serpent with a face exactly like his was another Azik. All of this originated from a hidden attempt before death fell. At this moment, Azik felt the call and desire of the other half of his soul. The two selves who had been separated for more than 1,000 years were eager to merge into one and return to completeness. But he didn't want to. He knew that his transformed feathered serpent self had no rationality at all, filled with an extremely strong coldness and madness. If he merged with the other party, he would become a pseudo-death god with only divinity and no humanity. Then he would forget everything, forget everyone he once cherished. But the power of fusion was so powerful, Azik's expression twisted, and he finally slowly walked towards the feathered serpent. As he approached, the surroundings became transparent, reflecting a world with countless skeletons and shadows. Listening to the painful whispers and roars, Klein's mind flashed rapidly, and he was anxious and panicked. But the gap between his level and Azik's was as vast as the sky. In an instant, Klein felt a strong sense of powerlessness, but he did not give up. He desperately recalled what extraordinary items he had on his body that could be used. When he thought of the Fate Stealer charm, he already had an idea in his mind, to use this charm to temporarily swap his fate with Mr. Azik's. He thought in his heart, "At least I still have the possibility of resurrection, but Mr. Azik may never wake up in this situation." Thinking of this, he raised his right hand and reached into his pocket. At the same time, Azik and the feathered serpent were getting closer and closer. His eyes under the pale flames were full of pain, and his expression was twisted to the extreme. Klein looked at him, and then suddenly flung his right arm. At the moment when the charm was about to take effect, the surroundings suddenly became quiet, and there was no sound anymore. A slender and white female palm appeared out of thin air and pressed on Azik's forehead. A figure appeared with it, interrupting his approach to the feathered serpent. It was a beautiful lady, in a classic robe and black hood. She was the one who prevented Klein from getting the Antigonus family notebook. The Scarlet Sovereign who was more noble than the starry sky and more eternal than eternity, the Evernight Goddess. She gave Azik 3 choices. Azik's choice was to forever stay at the current level, like before, dying again and waking up again and again from memory loss, repeating the experience of searching for the past. He chose this way in the hope of remembering everyone he once cherished, rather than becoming a high and mighty god. After the Evernight Goddess left, Azik told Klein that he would go into a long sleep to recover himself, and then threw the copper whistle to Klein, smiling gently. "Remember to write letters, but I won't reply to you before I wake up." Azik at this time did not know that when he woke up, the young man in front of him would also fall into a long sleep. So far, Mr. Azik, the strongest bodyguard of the protagonist Klein, officially left indefinitely. For the current Klein, his task is revenge, hunting down the enemy who killed Captain Dunn, Ince Zangwill. Soon Danitz, the devotee of the Fool, accidentally encountered Ince Zangwill and recognized him. At the same time, the visionary angel Adam also came here secretly. Danitz hurriedly chanted the Fool's honorific name. Illusory and layered prayer sounds rang out. Klein suddenly got up, wrote a letter to Leonard, and then traveled to the square where he was. Seeing this enemy, countless scenes flashed through his mind in an instant, his heart being pierced. Captain Dunn smiling and winking his left eye at him, the Blackthorn Security Company becoming ruins. The corners of Klein's mouth quickly split open and upturned, revealing a comical smile. In his right palm, the silver-gray charm trembled and ignited a dark black light. This was praying to the Evernight goddess, using the blood of the mercury snake to make a calamity charm, which was a gift he prepared for Ince Zangwill, a curse from God. On the other side, Leonard's expression became sullen when he saw the letter. Just as he was about to leave, Ms. Daly looked at him and said in a deep voice, "Take me with you. At least you fought back then, but I didn't have time to do anything." Daly had always been in love with Captain Dunn. Leonard opened his mouth slightly, but in the end said nothing. He grabbed Ms. Daly's shoulder, and the next moment the two disappeared and appeared in the square. At this time, in order to resist the influence of sealed artifact Zoo-08, Klein chose to merge into the blasphemy card Tyrant, holding the scepter of the sea god, transforming into the Fool. With the strength of a demigod, he faced the Sequence 4 Night Watchman. Ms. Daly and Klein joined forces, sacrificing the Hellsinger marionette, a high-level charm, and 2 magical items, causing the evil spirit possessed by Ince Zangwill to withdraw from the battlefield. At this moment, Leonard clenched the Fate Stealer charm in his right hand and chanted ancient supernatural language in a low voice. Then Leonard picked up his revolver, pointed at his temple, and pulled the trigger, using the charm to transfer fate to his enemy Ince Zangwill. Ince Zangwill held sealed artifact Zoo-08, writing to strengthen himself, pull the enemy into a dream and summon spirit world creatures. But because this was the Metropolis Backland, Ince Zangwill did not want to fight here. Countless lightning bolts fell, the mourner's gun pulled the trigger, and the Fate Stealer charm and creeping hunger constantly affected Ince Zangwill. He had to transform into a mythical creature form, which was a combination of Evernight and Dith power. Ms. Daly was affected by the dream. In the dream was the former captain, her lover. Ms. Daly whispered, "Last time I missed it. I didn't have time to do anything. I don't want to be like this again today." Her expression became sad, but the corners of her mouth curled up little by little. She took out a small metal bottle, dropped the stopper, and drank the liquid inside. In an instant, her coiled hair disintegrated and scattered around. She then firmly chanted, "Spirits who wander in the void, terrifying upper realm beings, unpredictable visitors, I sign a contract with you in my name, and pray that you leave here." Ms. Daly sacrificed herself, sending the spirit world creature summoned by sealed artifact Zoo-08 out of the battlefield. In Ince Zangwill's dark eyes, blood-red gray rays spread out, turning into 2 bloodthirsty, cruel, and crazy light clusters. He left an afterimage in place and rushed towards Ms. Daly at high speed. He no longer thought about anything else, just wanting to tear this night watchman who had ruined his escape into pieces. Leonard knew that the situation was critical, but there was nothing he could do, because he was affected by the dream and could not determine Ince Zangwill's position at all. At this moment, he seemed to return to Tingen City again, back to the day of the fierce battle with Magos, back to the weak and powerless self who could not stop anything. At this moment, he suddenly thought of the fool's honorific name that Dawn had mentioned. For revenge, what if he dedicated his soul and everything to an evil god? Leonard's expression suddenly became resolute, and he firmly began to chant the fool's honorific name. The fool who does not belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Just as the chanting finished, Ince Zangwill's location appeared in his mind. Leonard was stunned for a moment, then laughed, tears streaming down his face as he laughed. He raised his right hand without hesitation and tightly grasped the Fate Stealer charm. At the same time, silver-white lightning burst out violently. Leonard threw out the charm with a ferocious expression, shouting sharply, "Go to hell, Ince Zangwill!" Accompanied by a piercing scream, cracks appeared one after another on Ince Zangwill's head, and his ribs and waist were completely charred. But even so, he was still not dead. Darkness filled with the aura of death surged out of his body, enveloping Leonard not far away. "You are going to die soon, and so is that woman," Ince Zangwill cursed through gritted teeth. "Your captain, your teammates, so annoying. After I kill you, I will return to Tingen and dig up all their graves." Leonard felt misfortune entangling him, but he was powerless, unable even to open his eyes. Bang! A gunshot suddenly rang out, bringing with it blazing sunlight. Tarot cards flew over and were inserted in all directions, one of which stood in front of Leonard, rising with crimson flames. In the flames, Klein walked out holding the mourner's gun, raised his right hand and pulled the trigger. Ince Zangwill was knocked to the ground by the powerful impact, and the cracks in his head became wider. Klein abandoned the way of fighting as the fool and chose to directly enter the battlefield. While shooting, he said, "This shot is for Ms. Daly, this shot is for Leonard, this shot is for Magos, this shot is for the Eternal Guardians, this shot is for all the Night Watchmen, this shot is for myself." Ince Zangwill's roar became weaker and weaker, and he gradually lay on the ground. Klein finally flashed to Ince Zangwill's side and pressed the mourner's revolver, forcefully against his head. This shot is for the captain. Ince Zangwill died on the spot. Klein took out the remaining tarot card from his pocket and threw it on Ince Zangwill's body. It was a reverse star card. At this moment, a figure appeared not far away, bent down and picked up the dim quill. He was wearing a simple white robe, with light gold beard, and a cross pendant hanging on his chest. He was the visionary angel Adam. Adam looked at Klein and said with a smile, "All gifts of fate have long been marked with a price in secret, haven't they?" After speaking, he turned his body and disappeared step by step in the dilapidated square. At this time, Klein came to Miss Daly's side. Miss Daly was close to completely out of control, and said confusedly, "I don't want to become a monster." She looked at Klein, smiled with difficulty and said, "You asked me before why I didn't take the initiative to confess to Dunn. That's because I had too much indulgence in the past, and he was a conservative person. I was very inferior." In her hazy vision, she saw again the man in a black trench coat, with a high hairline and deep gray eyes. She saw him press his hand to his chest, bend down and extend his palm, inviting her to dance. This was Klein transformed into Captain Dunn using his faceless ability. Dunn pulled her up, and in the dilapidated square with turbulent fountains, they danced a light dance. Daly leaned gently in Dunn's arms, gradually losing her life. Witnessed by many spectators, Klein completed a gorgeous performance, successfully hunting Ince Zangwill, and the potion in his body was completely digested. He took the sequence 4 potion and advanced to magician. He took off his silk top hat towards Leonard, gave a farewell salute, and then turned and left. Leonard's lips moved, and he suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Aren't you returning to the church?" Klein did not turn around, and replied to Leonard with his back to him, "I can't go back." Leonard was silent, watching the familiar back gradually drift away and disappear. Klein, who had left, entered the gray fog above. At this time, he had a preliminary understanding and mastery of the magician's abilities. He could turn into animals, and could completely transform the target into a marionette within 15 seconds. At the same time, he could let the marionette use all of his extraordinary abilities, and freely swap positions with the marionette within an effective range of 1,000 meters. In other words, as long as any marionette is still alive, the magician will not die. After resting for a while, Klein walked towards the depths of the mysterious space above the gray fog, towards the light staircase, stepped on the clouds formed by the gray fog. What came into view were one after another almost completely transparent cocoons. Those cocoons swayed gently, each wrapping different earthlings. They all had the aura of life, but their eyes were tightly closed. 3 cocoons had already broken open at this time, and there was nothing inside, swaying in the wind. Klein, who raised his head and looked up, silently watched all this, quietly watching. Klein seemed to understand something. Thus Lord of the Mysteries Volume 4, The Undying End.